Magic Treehouse, Book Number 44, A Merlin Mission, A Ghost Tale for Christmas Time, written by Mary Pope Osborne. Chapter 1. Did you see that? Jack and Danny were walking home from soccer practice. It was 4:30 in the afternoon. Sunlight was fading quickly. November has really short days, said Jack. Yeah, but it has really beautiful skies, said Annie. The horizon glowed with the orange light of sunset. Suddenly, a streak of light blazed over the Frog Creek woods. Whoa, said Jack. Did you see that? See what? Said Annie. A streak of light, said Jack, like a shooting star. Over the woods? Asked Annie. Over the woods, said Jack. He started to run. Run, said Annie. I'm running, said Jack. Jack and Danny ran down the sidewalk and into the Frog Creek woods. Their feet crunched through fallen leaves as they raced among the shadows. Finally, they came to the tallest oak in the woods. The magic treehouse sat high in the branches. Teddy and Kathleen were looking out of the treehouse window. The two young enchanters seemed to glow in the fading daylight. Teddy was grinning and waving. Kathleen's long dark hair blew in the breeze. Hello, Teddy called. Hello yourself, Annie shouted back. Come up, called Kathleen. Jack and Danny hurried up the rope ladder. They climbed inside the treehouse and hugged Teddy and Kathleen. We haven't seen you guys in so long, said Jack. What have you been doing? Oh, learning more magic and practicing it, said Teddy. Turning frogs into boys. And boys into frogs, said Kathleen, smiling at Teddy. Yes, I rather enjoyed being a frog for a day, said Teddy. Jack and Danny laughed. We missed you, said Annie. We missed you too, said Kathleen. We were both delighted when Merlin told us it was time to send you on a new mission. Does he want us to help another great artist give their gifts to the world? Asked Jack. Yes, said Teddy. So far you have helped Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Louis Armstrong, and Lady Augusta Gregory. Now your mission is to travel to Victorian England and help Charles Dickens. His name sounds familiar, said Jack, but I can't remember why. Me neither, said Annie. I am sure you will know a great deal about him by the end of your mission, said Kathleen. In the meantime, here is something to help you. She reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out a book. The cover showed two girls wearing long skirts and big bonnets. The girls were walking along a path lined with trees. Behind the trees were buildings with towers and tall chimneys. London? Said Jack. That's the city in England where we met William Shakespeare. Yes, but Charles Dickens lived over 200 years after Shakespeare's time, said Kathleen. He lived in the 1800s during Victorian times. What's that mean, Victorian times? Asked Annie. It means the years during which a queen named Victoria ruled the British Empire, said Teddy. Cool, a queen, said Annie. But can I ask you something? This cover shows girls in long hoop skirts like I wore when we went at the time of Mozart. It was really hard to run and do stuff those clothes. Can I please wear something else? Teddy laughed. Yes, I think we can arrange for you to wear more comfortable clothing, he said. But you may have to pretend to be a boy. That's okay, said Annie. So do we have a magic instrument for this mission? Asked Jack. Indeed, said Kathleen. We gave you a magic flute to help Mozart, a magic trumpet to help Louis Armstrong, and a magic Irish whistle to help Lady Augusta Gregory. Do you still have the whistle? Sure, we left it here, said Annie. She grabbed the whistle from the corner of the treehouse and gave it to Kathleen. "Thank you," said Kathleen. She tossed the whistle into the air. It spun around and around. There was a flash of blue. The whistle was gone. Floating in its place was a small violin and bow. Kathleen reached up and took them from the air. "Here is a magic violin to help you on your journey," she said. "I really like violin music," said Jack. "Good," said Kathleen. She handed the violin and bow to Jack. "Then on this mission, perhaps you should play while Annie makes up a song." "No problem," said Annie. "And whatever I sing will come true, right?" "Exactly," said Teddy. "Any more questions?" asked Kathleen. "Nope," said Annie. Jack was sure he had more questions, but before he had time to think of any, Annie pointed to the cover of the book. "I wish we could go there," she said. The wind started to blow. The treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster. Then everything was still. Absolutely still. Chapter 2. Two Gentlemen from Frog Creek. Jack and Annie were both dressed in brown and green velvet jackets and dark pants. They wore loose wool caps and shiny new boots. Jack's backpack had become a green velvet bag with a brass buckle. "Fancy clothes," said Jack. "Well, at least I'm not wearing a giant skirt like I wore in Vienna," said Annie. "Yeah, and these boots aren't full of holes like the boots we wore in Ireland," said Jack. "So where did we land?" said Annie. She and Jack looked out the window. The treehouse had landed in a row of big trees. Beyond the trees was a grass park with gardens and pathways. Bordering the park was a busy road filled with horse-drawn carriages. Autumn sunlight shone on rooftops, towers, and church steeples. Black smoke rose from hundreds of chimneys. "London looks great," said Annie. "Let's start looking for Charles Dickens." "Wait, I'll check the book first," said Jack. Jack looked in the index of their book and found Charles Dickens. He turned to a page with the photograph of a handsome man with wavy brown hair and huge eyes. Jack read, "Charles Dickens was born in England in 1812. He is one of the most famous writers of all time." "Of all time?" said Annie. "Wow, he shouldn't be hard to find." "Maybe he isn't famous yet," said Jack. "If he is, why would he need our help?" "Good question," said Annie. "Let's start looking for the answer." "Okay, but first you'd better hide your pigtails," said Jack. "Oh, right, I'm supposed to be a boy," said Annie. She tucked her pigtails under her cap. "In the past, girls didn't have many choices, did they? How do I look?" "Fine," said Jack. "Good, let's go," said Annie. As Annie climbed out of the treehouse, Jack unbuckled the green velvet bag. He put their research book and magic violin and bow inside. Then he buckled the bag and followed Annie down the ladder. When Jack stepped off the ladder, he heard jingling in his coat pocket. He reached in and pulled out a handful of coins. "Hey, I have money," he said. Annie dug into her pockets. "Me too," she said. "Great," said Jack. "I didn't like being poor on our last two missions." Jack and Annie crunched through fallen leaves until they came to the open park area. A man stood on a platform giving a speech. A woman pushed baby buggies. Children sailed toy boats on a pond. "We have to ask someone for help," said Annie, looking around. "Excuse me," she called to a woman in a flowery bonnet. "Do you know where Charles Dickens lives?" "Why, yes. He and his family live at 1 Devonshire Terrace," the woman said, "below Regent's Park." "Thanks," said Annie. "That was easy," said Jack as the woman strolled on. "I guess he's already famous," said Annie. "Yeah," said Jack, pulling out their book again. "Let's see if there's a map." He thumbed through the book until he found a map of London. "Here it is, Regent's Park." He looked up. Where are we now? That sign over there says Hyde Park, said Annie. Wrong park, said Jack. He looked at the map again. Okay, Hyde Park is here, and Regent's Park is here. They're pretty far away from each other. That's okay, said Annie. We have money, and London has carriages. This will be fun. Right, said Jack. Let's go catch a ride. Jack and Annie hurried over the grass to the busy street bordering the park. Carriages of all shapes and sizes clattered over the cobblestones. 4 high-stepping horses pulled an elegant black coach. 2 donkeys pulled an old wooden wagon with benches. Excuse me, Jack called to the driver of a small red carriage waiting on the street. Can you take us to 1 Devonshire Terrace below Regent's Park? The driver smiled down from his seat. Indeed, sir, he said. I would be proud to carry 2 fine young gentlemen across our fair city. Jack caught Annie's eye and smiled. Thank you, he said. Climb into my cab, if you please, said the driver. Where are you gentlemen from? Frog Creek, said Annie in a deep voice. Frog Creek, said the driver. Lovely place, I'm sure. Then he flicked the reins, and his fat little horse started clopping up the cobblestone street. In the cool autumn air, the cab passed brick mansions with gardens and ornate buildings with turrets and towers. This is a beautiful city, said Annie. Yeah, said Jack. He pulled out their book and turned to the beginning. One of the first pages showed a portrait of a plump-faced woman in a red robe. She wore a small crown on her head. The Victorian era in England began when Queen Victoria came to the throne in 1837. She ruled for the rest of the century and helped her country become a powerful world empire. Wow, said Annie. She stuck her head out the window of the cab and called up to the driver. Excuse me, sir, where's the Queen today? I believe she's on holiday with Prince Albert, said the driver. How long has she been Queen? Asked Annie. Let's see. She was crowned and moved into Buckingham Palace 6 years ago, the driver said. Thanks, said Annie. She sat back in her seat. I love this time in history with a queen, a prince, and a palace. Yep, said Jack. He read on. During the reign of Queen Victoria, England went through a period known as the Industrial Revolution. People no longer worked mainly on farms. The invention of machines led to work in factories and mines. Many people became very wealthy. Jack glanced out the window. The people on the sidewalks did look wealthy. Women and girls dressed in ruffles and ribbons strolled in and out of elegant shops. Boys wore frilly white shirts. Men wore top hats and suits. Jack read on. But while many people became rich in Victorian England, many more worked under terrible conditions. Even young children worked in factories and mines. Rich and poor lived side by side, but they lived in very different worlds. While the rich feasted in grand mansions, the poor often died young of hunger and disease. Whoa, said Annie. Maybe I don't love this time as much as I thought. The horse and cab came to a halt. Here we are, the driver called. 1 Devonshire Terrace. Jack closed their book and looked up. The cab had stopped in front of a high brick wall with an iron gate. Jack and Annie stepped down to the sidewalk. The driver climbed off his perch. How much do we owe you? Asked Jack. 1 shilling, if you please, sir, said the driver. Jack reached into his pocket and took out a large coin. He had no idea how much it was worth, but he gave it to the driver. I hope this is enough, he said. The man's eyes grew wide. Why, good heavens, I should say it is. Thank you, gentlemen, thank you, thank you. My children, thank you. All the good, hard-working people of the world, thank you. Shall I come to pick you up later? "Sorry, but we don't know how long we'll be here," said Jack. "Well, perhaps I'll pass by this way now and again," the driver said. "If I see you, I shall certainly stop. I'm always pleased to carry such fine young gentlemen." The man bowed. Then he climbed back up onto his bench. "Good day, good sirs," he called, tipping his hat. As the horse and cab clattered away, Jack looked at Annie. "He was nuts," he said. Annie laughed. "I think you gave him a lot more than the regular fare," she said. The gate behind Jack and Annie swung open. 3 small children bounded out to the sidewalk. 2 girls with curly hair and a round-faced boy. A woman with a baby followed them out. "Mary, Kate, Charlie, wait for me." "Hurry, mother," yelled the little boy. "You wait for me, Charlie Dickens," the young mother called. She caught up with the children, and they all vanished around the corner. "Charlie Dickens?" said Jack, stunned. Chapter 3. Riches to Rags. Jack looked at Annie. "She called that kid Charlie Dickens," he said. "I heard," said Annie. "So Charles Dickens must be 5 or 6 years old." "Oh, man," said Jack, groaning. "So Merlin wants us to help another little kid like we helped Wolfie Mozart?" "Seems like it," said Annie. "Wait a minute. That doesn't make sense. Let's do the math," said Jack. "Our book said Charles Dickens was born in 1812. He pulled out their research book and looked at the first page. "And Queen Victoria became queen in 1837. "The driver said she's been queen for 6 years, said Annie. "So now it's 1843. Subtract 1812 from 1843. Jack squeezed his eyes shut. "And you get 31, he said. "Good work," said Annie. "So Charles Dickens is 31, said Jack. "And Charlie must be Charles Jr. "Great," said Annie. "Let's go meet Charles Sr." Jack put away their book, and he and Annie walked to the front gate. Between the iron bars, they could see a beautiful 3-story house with tall windows. "Nice place," said Annie. "It looks like Charles Dickens has already given his gifts to the world." "Yeah, and gotten some back," said Jack. "So I wonder what his problem is." "We'll have to figure that out when we meet him," said Annie. She jangled a bell hanging from the gate. A moment later, the front door opened. A stout woman in a white apron came out and walked to the gate. "Yes," she said through the bars. "Is this the Dickens residence?" said Annie. "Yes," said the woman. "Ah, excellent," said Annie. "We've come to call on Charles Dickens." "Indeed? Who are you?" asked the woman. "We're Jack and Dan," started Annie. "Andrew," finished Jack. "Right," said Annie, clearing her throat and deepening her voice. "We're Jack and Andrew from Frog Creek. And who are you?" "I am Mrs. Tibbs, the housekeeper," said the woman, "and it is my sad job to tell you that Mr. Dickens can have no visitors today. He is working on his latest book and cannot be disturbed." "Mrs. Tibbs," said Annie, "may we have just 5 short minutes of Mr. Dickens' time, please?" "Young man, I am afraid that right now Mr. Dickens needs every minute he can spare for his writing," said Mrs. Tibbs. "Surely you know how important Mr. Dickens' work is." "Yes, ma'am, surely we do," said Jack. "But I am terribly sorry, young gentleman," said Mrs. Tibbs. "It grieves me to turn you away, but I must. I pray that you will bear no grudge against Mr. Dickens." With that, Mrs. Tibbs turned and hurried back inside. "Well, that didn't get us very far," said Jack. "Surely it did not," said Annie. "Pardon us, sirs," someone said. Jack and Annie turned around. 2 boys with dirty clothes and dirty faces were standing behind them. The taller boy wore an old top hat, and the smaller one wore a wool cap that was too big for him. He carried a large round brush, a broom, and some rags. "Oh, hi," said Jack. "We was just needing to ring the bell, sir, if you don't mind," the bigger boy said. "Sure," said Jack, "but the housekeeper's not letting anyone in today. That's why we're leaving." "She'll let us in," said the smaller boy. "We've come to sweep the chimneys." "Really? She'll let you in the house?" said Annie. "Hold on." She turned to Jack. "I've got an idea." "No, you don't," said Jack. "See you guys, bye." He tried to move Annie along, but she pulled away. "Wait, don't ring the bell yet," Annie said to the boys. "Would you be interested in trading places with us for a while?" "Annie," said Jack. "Shh," said Annie. The boys looked confused. "Trade places?" asked the bigger boy. "Why?" "Actually," said Jack. But Annie jumped in. "Here's the deal," she said. "We've come a long way, and we really want to talk to Mr. Dickens. So maybe if we go in and clean the chimneys, we'll have a chance." "We can't lose our wages," said the bigger boy. "How much do you get paid for this job?" asked Annie. "2 pence," said the smaller boy. Annie reached into her pocket and pulled out a handful of coins. She gave them to the boy. "Is that good?" Both boys looked at her with wide eyes and nodded eagerly. "And you'll get our coats, too," said Annie, "if you give us yours." Whoa, excuse me," Jack said. He pulled Annie aside. "This is not a good plan." "Yes, it is," Annie said. "Remember when we got kicked out of the big house in Ireland? If we'd had a job, we could have hung around there longer." "But we don't know how to sweep chimneys," said Jack. "How hard can it be?" said Annie. "It will get us inside the house. Then we can keep an eye out for Mr. Dickens. The next thing you know, we've figured out the problem and we're playing our magic music and Mr. Dickens is giving more gifts to the world. Mission accomplished." Before Jack could protest, Annie turned back to the chimney sweeps. "So, do you want to trade your coats for ours? Hats, too?" The boys stared at her in wonder. "Them is fine coats, Harry," said the smaller boy. "And fine hats, too." He threw down the brush, broom, and rags. He traded his coat for Annie's velvet coat, and traded his dirty, ragged cap for her new, clean cap. "Hey, you're a girl," the boy said when he saw Annie's braids. "So what if I am?" Annie asked, tucking her braids under the dirty cap. "Forget it, Colin. Rich folks are strange," Harry said. He pulled off his coat and held it out to Jack. "Here," he said with a big grin. Jack sighed and traded his beautiful velvet coat and wool cap for Harry's tattered coat and top hat. "And what about your boots?" asked Harry. Harry looked down at his shiny leather boots. He looked at Harry's dirty old shoes. "Come on, Jack," said Annie. "These guys need them more than we do." Annie pulled off her boots. Colin took off his shoes and handed them to her. Jack sighed again and sat down to take off his boots. Colin and Harry stood tall in their new boots and jackets and hats. "How about it, Colin?" said Harry, shaking his head. "In 2 minutes, we went from rags to riches." Colin let out a wild whoop. Then the 2 boys linked arms and danced a jig, picking up their boots. When they stopped dancing, Harry rang the gate bell wildly. As the bell clanged, the front door of the house flew open. The housekeeper stuck her head outside. "Stop the noise, you idiots! I'm coming!" she screeched. "Let's go, Colin, before they change their minds," said Harry. As the 2 boys ran off in their new velvet coats, Jack heard money jingling. "Oh, no," he said. "We forgot to empty our pockets." That's okay, said Annie. I'm sure they need the money more than we do. They were so happy going from rags to riches. Yeah, right, said Jack. And we just went from riches to rags. Shh, here comes Mrs. Tibbs, said Annie. We'd better smudge our faces with the rags so she won't recognize us. She rubbed her face with a dirty rag, then Jack's. There, you look like a real chimney sweep now. The housekeeper stomped the gate and unlocked it. Don't break my eardrums next time, you knaves, she cried. Jack and Annie grabbed the brush and broom. They kept their heads down as they headed for the front door. Not that door, you fools, yelled Mrs. Tibbs. Go round to the back. Chapter 4. Out, out, out. Jack and Annie hurried around to the back door and slipped inside the house. They walked through a small, dark mudroom, then stepped into the large front hallway. Sun slanted through the tall windows. Everything seemed to be made of carved wood or marble. A wide staircase curved up to the second floor. Get to work, sweeps, barked the housekeeper. Do the regular. Mrs. Tibbs left them and clumped down the back stairs. Jack heard pots clattering below. He realized the kitchen must be in the cellar. The rest of the house was quiet, as if it was waiting for the mother and children to return. I wonder where Mr. Dickens is writing, Annie whispered. He must be working quietly somewhere in the house, said Jack. Mrs. Tibbs came bustling up the back stairs and burst into the front hallway. I told you to get to work, she said. If I don't see you working in 2 minutes, I'll throw you out on our ears. The housekeeper then disappeared up the wide staircase to the second floor. I guess we'd better get to work, said Jack. So where do we start? Said Annie. Let's check out the fireplaces on this floor, said Jack. Jack and Annie crept into a dining room that overlooked a garden. A fire crackled in the hearth. She can't expect us to clean that chimney, said Jack, unless she wants us to burn to death. Jack and Annie went back through the front hall and into a room filled with leather-bound books. There was no fire in the large fireplace, but the room was bright and warm. It had big windows, a rich-colored plush carpet, and mirrors that reflected the light from outside. A vase of fresh flowers sat on a desk facing one of the windows. Oh, man, I love this room, said Jack, staring at all the books. Yeah, and look, there's a desk with a feather pen and paper, said Annie. I'll bet this is where Mr. Dickens does his writing. I wonder where he is. Maybe he's taking a break, said Jack. Maybe he'll come in here soon, said Annie. Let's start cleaning the chimney. Okay, said Jack. But first, we have to figure out how. He unbuckled the green bag and pulled out their research book. He looked in the index and found chimney sweeps. He turned to the right page and read aloud. In Victorian England, young boys worked as chimney sweeps, cleaning the soot made by coal fires. It was not only a dirty job, but a dangerous one as well. Great. Jack closed the book. Good work, Annie. You made us give up our nice clothes and all our money, and you landed us a dirty, dangerous job. Don't worry, said Annie. We shoveled coal, washed dishes, and hauled bananas. Louis Armstrong. We can do this. Yeah, but how do we do it? The book doesn't tell us, said Jack. Well, we've got a brush, a broom, and rags, said Annie. Let's start by using them. Remember, we're just waiting to run into Charles Dickens. Then we'll chat with them and play our music and... Okay, said Jack. He put the book away. Jack and Annie stepped into the hearth. Annie got down on her hands and knees and began scrubbing the stones with the brush. Jack pushed his broom up the chimney and tried to sweep the soot off the bricks. A pile of soft black powder fell on his head. It got in his eyes and mouth. "Oh, no," whispered Jack, puffing and blowing. As he squeezed his eyes shut, he felt Annie yank his sleeve. "Don't," he said. "Shh," whispered Annie. "He's here." Jack opened his watery eyes. He saw a small, slender man standing in the hallway outside the door. The man had wavy brown hair. He wore a dark coat and pants. He was reading some papers and muttering to himself. "Mr. Dickens," whispered Annie. Before Jack could say anything, the man shouted, "Let no one enter my study, Mrs. Tibbs, under penalty of death." And he came into his study and slammed the door. "Penalty of death?" thought Jack. "He's got to be kidding." But he and Annie crouched down in the fireplace. Mr. Dickens didn't notice them or Jack's green velvet bag sitting on the carpet. As he crossed the room, he kept looking at his papers and muttering to himself. He sat down at the desk, facing the window. He picked up the feather pen, dipped it into an ink pot, and began to write. Suddenly, Mr. Dickens leapt out of his chair and rushed to one of the mirrors. He put his hands around his neck and cried, "Ah!" He struggled and made a horrible face as if someone was choking him. Then the writer hurried back to his desk and scrawled a few more lines. He stopped and read what he'd written. "Good, good," he said. Then Mr. Dickens leapt up again and rushed back to the mirror. This time he rapped his head with his knuckles. He looked furious. "Bah, bah, bah," he shouted. Jack and Annie watched, fascinated. Again Mr. Dickens hurried back to his desk and wrote. He stopped and read what he'd written. Then he crumpled the paper and threw it across the room. He covered his face with his hands and murmured, I can't." He was still for a long moment. "Excuse me, are you okay?" Annie asked in a soft voice. Mr. Dickens gasped and whirled around. He saw Jack's green velvet bag on the carpet. "What's that? Who's here?" Then he saw Jack and Annie huddled in the fireplace. He jumped out of his chair. "Chimney sweeps!" he cried. Why are you in my study?" "Sorry, we're just working on the chimney," said Annie. Mr. Dickens groaned. I can't bear it," he said. "I have to get out. I have to leave." He rushed across the room and threw open the door. The housekeeper was sweeping the hallway. "What's wrong, Mr. Dickens?" she asked. "I'm finished for today, Mrs. Tibbs," said Mr. Dickens. He pointed back into his study. Mrs. Tibbs saw Jack and Annie. "Oh, what are you doing in there?" she cried. "Mr. Dickens, I'm sorry, Never mind, I'm going out," said Mr. Dickens. "Tell Mrs. Dickens I don't know when I'll be back." He grabbed his hat and walking stick. Then he hurried out the front door. "Mr. Dickens, don't go!" cried Mrs. Tibbs, but the door closed before she could stop him. Mrs. Tibbs whirled around and charged into the room. "What are you doing in here, filthy brats?" she shrieked. "You know you're to start with the back rooms. Not his study, never his study." She waved her broom at them as if she was trying to sweep them away. "Out! Out! Out!" Jack grabbed his green bag. Then he and Annie fled from Mrs. Tibbs and her broom. They hurried out the front door. Mrs. Tibbs followed them to the iron gate. "Poor Mr. Dickens, you've ruined his day," she cried. "I hope that makes you happy." "No, it doesn't," said Annie. "All of England is waiting for his next story," cried Mrs. Tibbs. "Oh, brother," thought Jack. Mrs. Tibbs yanked open the gate. As Jack and Annie tried to slip past her, she grabbed Jack by his jacket. She looked at him closely. "Why, you're not Harry." She turned and looked at Annie. "And you're not Colin. What have you done with my regular sweeps?" she cried. "Nothing, they're fine," said Jack. "You better not have hurt them, you scamps," she said, pushing Jack and then Annie out onto the sidewalk. "They're fine, we promise, we're sorry," said Annie. "There's no forgiveness for all the harm you've done today," the housekeeper said, looking as if she might burst into tears. Then she pushed the iron gate shut. It slammed with a loud clang.